midnight screams.
Whenever I tell people my profession, they always laugh. A professional residential exorcist, I say, and they picture crucifixes, holy water, and Latin prayers echoing through cobweb-covered Victorian mansions. They picture Max von Sydow from The Exorcist with his sharp cheekbones and unwavering sense of justice. They can never imagine what I spend most of my time doing: filing noise complaints with local councils, negotiating legal occupancy with unauthorized tenants, and explaining to terrified homeowners that the demon-scratching noises from their walls are just rats and cockroaches having a blast in the insulation. My name is Xavier Rexar, and yes, I do have a Master of Exorcism Studies from SOAS, University of London. It was a niche program, run only from 2009 to 2013, an experimental collaboration between the Department of Theology and the Department of Cultural Anthropology. I was in the last cohort. The program was discontinued afterward. Of course, a degree alone isn't enough. So I went back to law school. Nothing embodies the identity of a professional exorcist quite like explaining to a ghost, while quoting the 1988 Housing Act, that the house would no longer belong to him once he died. Yes, Mr. Henderson, you do need to move out, because the new owner finalized the sale 3 months ago, and the deed is in my possession. I've been doing this for 7 years. I've seen it all. Or at least, I thought I had. Then, I got a call about the apartment on Bethnal Street. It was a late October afternoon, and I was in my office, actually. An empty bedroom in my apartment that I'd set up as an office, with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a bookshelf filled with books I'd never read. My phone rang. Not my cell phone, but my office landline, which hardly anyone uses anymore. I should have taken that as the first warning sign, but hindsight is always easy, isn't it? I'm Xavier Rexar, offering residential exorcism services, I replied, because that's what it says on my business card, and I'm known for my professionalism. Mr. Rexar. The other person was a middle-aged woman with an accent I couldn't quite place. Perhaps East London, but it sounded like something else entirely. I need your help. It's my apartment. There's something in there. I grabbed my notebook. Yes, I was still using pen and paper. Paper seemed to reassure clients and press the pen. What's your name, madam? Arachne. Marie Arachne. She paused, and I could hear her rapid, shallow breathing. I don't know what it is. That's why I called you. The priest can't help either. They say they don't sense anything amiss, but I know something's definitely wrong. I can't go back. I've been staying at my sister's for 3 weeks. All right, miss? Arachne, let's start with the basics. What exactly happened to you in that apartment? Another silence. This time, longer. It changes. The apartment changes? Everything changes. The furniture moves. The walls are a different color every day. Sometimes the room is bigger than it should be. Sometimes it's smaller. And I don't know how to describe it. It's a feeling, like the apartment is watching me, waiting for something. I sighed inwardly. This sounded like typical stress-induced paranoia, possibly accompanied by some kind of neurological disorder. I'd learned to recognize these signs, vague descriptions, emphasizing feelings rather than specific events, and an inability to provide concrete examples. But I had to pay rent. My services weren't cheap. Did you notice any physical symptoms in that apartment? Like headaches, nausea, and dizziness? No, none of those symptoms, Mr. Rexar. I know this might sound a bit strange. I know you might think I'm crazy, but I'm not. Really not. There's definitely something wrong with that place, something definite, and I need someone there to document it. Isn't that what you do? You stay there overnight, documenting everything that happens? Yes, it's part of my service. But I should mention that in about 90% of cases, we can find a plausible explanation. I'll give you £3,000 for 2 days, she interrupted me. Cash. Half up front, half later. I stopped mid-sentence. £3,000 was more than 4 times my usual rate. Marie Arachne was either desperate or had too much money to burn. Perhaps both. Miss Arachne, this is incredibly generous. Why are you in such a hurry? Why is the fee so high? Because I need someone to take this seriously. And she hesitated again. Because I've contacted 4 other people who do the same job as you, and they all refused as soon as they heard the address. Please, Mr. Rexar, please. You're my last hope. Her voice, well, sounded like a writer who couldn't write a female character and wrote her emitting a duck-like squeak. That's interesting. I leaned back in my chair, twirling my pen between my fingers. What's the address? 47B Bethnal Street, 3rd floor, right in Bethnal Green, near the tube station. I opened Google Maps on my laptop and entered the address. Street View loaded, showing a typical East London scene. Rows of brick buildings, shops on the ground floor, and apartments on the upper floors. But when I zoomed in on 47, something seemed off. The building looked a little blurry, not very clear. It was like the camera was moving while taking a picture, but the surrounding buildings were all clearly visible. Mr. Rexar? Are you still there? Yes. I'm sorry. I was checking. Miss Arachne, I need to ask you a question directly. Have you been experiencing any psychological problems lately? Like depression, anxiety, or anything like that? I don't mean to offend you, but these symptoms you've described can sometimes be related to anxiety disorders, etc. I haven't had a mental breakdown, she snapped. I haven't been hallucinating. I haven't been on drugs. I'm a high school teacher, Mr. Rexar. I grade papers and complain about the Education Standards Board's inspections. I'm bored, and I'm normal. But my apartment isn't normal. For 7 years, I've learned to distinguish between 3 kinds of people: confused people, mentally unstable people, and people who have truly experienced inexplicable things. Marie Arachne sounded like the third. Well, I said, making a decision I later deeply regretted, I'll take this case. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow. I'll be waiting for you outside at noon with the keys and half the payment. Thank you, Mr. Rexar. Thank you very much. Before I could ask any more questions, she hung up. I sat there, staring blankly at the blurry image of 47 Bethnal Street on the screen, a strange unease creeping up my neck. I told myself it was no big deal, just another job, another confused client, an extremely ordinary problem. If I spent a night in the apartment with a carbon monoxide detector and thermal imaging camera, everything would be clear. I had never made such a huge mistake in my life. The next day, I took the Central Line to Bethnal Green Station. It was a typical overcast day in London in winter time. The sky seemed to hang 3 feet overhead, like a wet blanket pressing down on everything. We get a lot of cases at this time of year, because there are so many people with depression. I packed my overnight bag, a change of clothes, toiletries, a laptop, an electromagnetic field strength meter, a carbon monoxide detector, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and a copy of the land registry information I had checked earlier. That's when I encountered my second problem, though I didn't fully realize it at the time. According to the land registry, 47B Bessemer Street didn't exist. 47 was a shop, a Turkish kebab shop. Above were apartments 47A and 47C. 47B didn't exist. I initially thought it was just an administrative error, perhaps due to recent renovations and the system not being updated yet. I had encountered this before. I should have turned back. I should have called Mary Arachne and told her I couldn't take the case, but £3,000 is £3,000. I found Mary Arachne waiting outside the kebab shop, just as she had said. I guessed she was in her 50s, with brown hair streaked with gray, tied in a neat ponytail, and dressed in comfortable, slightly worn clothes, the kind of person who prioritized practicality over fashion. She looked exhausted, not just physically but mentally, like someone who had been under prolonged stress. "Mr. Rexar?" She approached me immediately, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." "I thought you weren't coming." I shook her hand. Her hand was strong, but her palm was dry. There was no sign of sweat or trembling. "You mentioned that other exorcists refused to take this case. Why is that?" It was evening. The traffic was bustling, and people hurried across the street from the barbecue restaurant and Tesco convenience store. No one noticed us. "I don't want to talk about this here," she said. "I'll show you the apartment, and then we can talk. Actually, before we go up, could you tell me which window is yours? That way I can find my way." She looked at me strangely. "There are no windows on this side of the apartment. It's in the back." "Come on, I'll take you there." She led me into a narrow alley next to the kebab shop. London is full of these narrow passages, usually filled with the musty smell of garbage and beer. But I suddenly realized that this alley smelled of nothing. No garbage smell, no restaurant food smell, not even the usual London smells of car exhaust and rainwater. Absolutely nothing. The complete absence of smell in London alleyways should have been my third warning sign, but I was busy figuring out where this building was. The alley led to a small courtyard, one I was sure couldn't be seen from the street. A door was embedded in the brick wall, painted a mottled green, perhaps once the color of the forest, now more like the color of pond scum. Above the door, a rusty brass number read 47B. But that wasn't what made me stop and stare. This building, if it could be called a building, something looked wrong. I'm not referring to its dangerous or dilapidated appearance, but rather its unreal quality. The bricks have texture, but no signs of weathering. The mortar joints are too perfect, too regular. The windows, I can see a few now, facing the yard. They reflect nothing, just like painted glass, empty and gray, and its proportions are off. It's not an obvious error, not one of those "this building violates the laws of physics" errors of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, but a subtle, nauseating one. Like looking at an Escher painting, everything seems normal until you try to follow a line and find it leads to an impossible place. "This is it," Marie said, pulling a key from her pocket. She handed me the key but didn't approach the door. Her hand began to tremble. "I still have assignments to grade. I told you, I haven't been inside for 3 weeks. But you'll understand. You'll understand once you're inside." I took the key and examined the door more closely. As my gaze left the door, the wood grain seemed to move, flowing like water, as if the rings of a tree were rearranging into some kind of pattern, like some kind of alphabet I'd never seen before. "Miss Arachne, I need to ask, when did you move into this apartment?" 6 months ago. I rented it through a real estate agency. It was a very good deal for the area. I should have been suspicious, but I thought I was lucky. Do you still have the lease agreement? She nodded and pulled a folded document from her bag. I glanced at it quickly, a standard short-term lease agreement. Nothing wrong with it. The real estate agency was one I'd never heard of before, called Perpetual Properties Limited, with an address I couldn't see clearly. However, when I looked at the signature section, Maria Rackney's name, which should have been her own handwriting, was moving. The letters crawled across the paper like insects, rearranging themselves to spell different words. I blinked, and the signature returned to normal. Only Maria Rackney's name remained, written neatly in blue ink. "Mr. Rexar, are you all right?" Mary asked. "You look pale." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just thinking about things." "Miss Arachne, go back to your sisters. Don't wait for me. I'll call you when I'm done." She looked both relieved and guilty, shoving an envelope into my hand. Inside was the first £1,500, then, without a word, hurried back down the alley. I watched her leave, then turned and walked toward the door of 47B. The key slid smoothly into the lock. Too smoothly. As if the lock had been waiting for it. As if it had been shaped to welcome it. The door opened silently. The darkness beyond the door wasn't the absence of light. It was the presence of something. Something that occupied where light should have been. I could feel it pressing on my face like a spiderweb, like water, like the closing pages of a book. I went in anyway. Because I'm a professional. Because I'm a fool. Because, now that I think about it, the house seemed to want me in. The door closed behind me. Not with a bang, not with a click, but with a sound like a smile. I stood in what looked like a foyer, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the dim light. The walls were covered in wallpaper, but it wasn't wallpaper. It was newspaper. Thousands upon thousands of pages, layer upon layer, the text clearly visible yet constantly changing, the headlines shifting with the movement of my flashlight beam. "Local man enters impossible building," one headline read. "Exorcist discovers he's not alone," another headline read. "Xavier Rexar." He looked around nervously, as if checking to see if anyone was eavesdropping. The street was bustling with people. I read the third note. Below it appeared to be my obituary. Only the date was wrong. The date of death was listed as pending, and the cause of death as curiosity. I felt my breathing quicken. It wasn't a delusion caused by stress, nor carbon monoxide poisoning. This was a fundamental problem with reality itself, and I was right there in the middle of it. The beam of my flashlight found a light switch. I flipped it, and the overhead bulbs lit up. But the light they emitted was off. It was yellowish and dim, like the light in an old photograph, and it seemed to stop a few feet away from the bulbs, as if afraid to illuminate too much of the room. On my left, an opening led to what I guessed was the living room. To my right, a hallway disappeared into deeper darkness. Directly ahead, a staircase led upstairs. I stepped into the living room and immediately understood what Maria Rackney had described. The room was furnished with a sofa, chairs, coffee table, bookshelves, television. But everything seemed like a stage set, as if someone had read a description of a typical London apartment living room and pieced it together from memory, without ever actually seeing a living room like this. I walked to the sofa and reached out to touch it. My hand slipped through the cushions, feeling as if they were made of paper, because it really was made of paper. Not even the kind of cleverly folded origami, just ordinary paper with the sofa's image printed on it, somehow standing upright, maintaining the illusion of three-dimensionality until you actually wanted to interact with it. I pulled my hand back. The paper crumpled, then straightened out. The sofa was complete again, looking solid and real, casting perfectly balanced shadows, existing perfectly until you tried to verify if it even existed. Okay, I muttered to myself, because only muttering to myself could keep me from screaming. This is good. This is a conceptual space, a place that exists as an idea, not a physical location. I've read books about it, pure theory. There's never been any actual written record. My voice trailed off as I noticed the bookshelf. The bookshelf was filled with books, hundreds, even thousands, spines facing out, titles and authors printed on them. But upon closer inspection, I realized they were all the same book, repeated over and over, with only subtle differences. The title was The 47B House, A Study of Architectural Impossibility by Xavier Rexar. Every book on the shelf was one I hadn't yet written, telling the story of the place I was in right now, my name printed on its spine. I reached for one, but my hand passed right through it. More pages, more illusions, but I couldn't read the words on the spine. A nameless dread gripped me as I realized this house was showing me possibilities. It was showing me the ending of this story. It showed me that it understood the essence of the story, knew I was involved, and understood its direction. Just then, I heard a sound from upstairs. Not footsteps, nor the dragging sound Mary had mentioned. It was something else, a rustling sound, like thousands of pages turning simultaneously, like the library sighing. All my instincts were telling me not to go upstairs. All my training, every case I'd investigated, every rational part of my brain was screaming that I should turn around, force open that door, and run until I crashed into something real. But I had already taken Mary Arachne's 1,500 pounds. And beneath the fear was a curiosity, the very curiosity that had initially driven me to study exorcism, to explore the edges of reality, to explore the boundary between possibility and impossibility. I began to climb the stairs. Each step creaked, not the creak of wood, but the sound of folded paper unfolding. A paper staircase took shape beneath my feet, then vanished behind me. The walls here had long abandoned any pretense of paint or brickwork. They had become newspapers, blatantly revealing articles about me. Always had. I stopped to read one. Xavier Rexar, 34, graduated in 2011 from SOAS, University of London, with a master's degree in exorcism studies, but the program was discontinued shortly afterward. Friends described him as pragmatic, skeptic. You would never guess he believed in ghosts. A journalist contacted his mother, who said she wished he had gone to medical school. This was true. 5 years ago, my mother and I had argued, and she had indeed said this. How could the house know any of this? How could it know anything about me? Another article containing a photograph of me, but I had absolutely no recollection of anyone taking my picture. I continued climbing. The staircase spiraled upward, disproportionate to the building's external dimensions, each turn sending me soaring far beyond its intended height. I counted the floors, 5th, 6th, 7th. From the outside, the building appears to have only 3 floors. Finally, At the top of the stairs is a platform with only one door. This time, it's not green, but white. Pure white, without any texture, grain, or flaw. Just pure white, smooth and absolute. I can still hear the rustling behind the door. Now it's louder, more urgent. I push the door open. The room beyond is unbelievable. It stretches in all directions, far beyond my sight, far beyond the building's capacity, and far beyond the limits of physics. The ceiling disappears into a sky that isn't a sky, neither dark nor light, anything I can't describe in words. And the walls are entirely composed of pages, billions of pages, endless pages, every page ever written anywhere in the world, and pages that exist only in possibility, only in drafts, only in stories that will never be told. They cover all surfaces, layer upon layer, so thick that the walls themselves seem like compressed text, pressed together by the weight of narrative. In the center of the room, something was writing. I say something because I truly didn't know how to describe it. When I looked directly at it, my eyes couldn't focus. My brain simply refused to process what it saw. But in my peripheral vision, I could almost feel it. It was enormous. It had limbs, or appendages, or extensions of itself. Those extensions were perhaps the limbs. Like the walls, it was made of words, narratives, and stories, but it was also alive, conscious, and perceptive. It wrote with something that might be a pen, on something that might be paper, and where it wrote, reality submitted to it. I froze, watching it write. The sofa downstairs, was now made of red leather instead of brown fabric. I didn't even need to check to know the sofa had changed. Xavier Rexar felt a powerful urge to approach it. My feet began to move, involuntarily pulling me forward, and I had to fight my own body to avoid crashing straight into that incomprehensible, living mass of words. Xavier Rexar stopped. I stopped abruptly, my feet dangling in midair, as if I'd bumped into a wall. That thing, or rather the house, because I now understood that the entire building was merely an extension of this entity, a materialization of something that existed primarily in narrative form. The house ceased its writing and turned towards me. I still couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel its vast, ancient, and utterly unfamiliar gaze fixed on me, like I would on an ant crawling across my table. Curiosity, slight interest, a desire to know what I would do next. "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. The pen moved again, and I swear, the way it traced the paper seemed almost mocking. A man with a master's degree in exorcism studies, standing in a building that shouldn't exist, conversing with something that doesn't actually exist. Xavier Rexar, a professional skeptic who simply can't accept the fact that some things exist without explanation. "You're witty." I tried to think rationally, trying to apply the logical framework I'd built up over the years. "Marie Arachne, did you create her?" "I created her image. As for whether that image later became someone who called you, or whether I simply recorded your memory of receiving that call, again, does it matter? The result is what matters. It's all the same. You're right here." "Come sue me," the thing said jokingly. I stared at the words on the paper, stared at the nonchalant, almost joking tone, stared at the admission of all this terrifying experience. This journey into the abyss of cosmic horror and existential fear was just a prank, a joke, amused by some vast, inhuman being and clearly possessing some self-proclaimed sense of humor. For you, this is just a game, I said slowly. You're just teasing me. Just for fun. He continued to laugh, as if watching ants struggle. People have died here, I said, the names of those I'd read in newspaper articles flashing through my mind, people who entered 47B and never left. Do you find that funny? The house displayed various texts to me about their happy endings. You want me to believe you've turned living people into words. I looked around at the infinitely large room, the walls made of pages, and the entity that wrote reality. I made a decision that would be either incredibly brave or utterly foolish. No, I said. The pen stopped. No, I repeated. I don't accept it. I turned and walked toward the door. Xavier Rexar cannot move, the entity wrote. I continued walking, one step, then another. My muscles were under my own control. My choices were my own. Xavier Rexar cannot move, it wrote again, but it wasn't in a hurry. I went to the door and grabbed the handle. Behind me, the rustling sound grew louder. Xavier Rexar can't leave. Xavier Rexar can't leave. Xavier Rexar, going home, I said, then remembered I had a pen, so I wrote on the wall. The thing started laughing. I could feel my skin being rubbed, a warm sensation, and I heard something like a baby's laughter. The staircase behind the door changed shorter, steeper, and descending at an almost impossible angle. But it was downward, and that was enough. I ran, taking 2 steps at a time, and behind me, the house seemed to be laughing. The living room flashed by in blurry images of paper furniture and newspaper-covered walls. The foyer appeared before me. The front door was right there, green, peeling, and almost impossible to open. But I grabbed the handle and pulled hard, and this time it opened. I stumbled into the yard, landing heavily on the sidewalk, scraping my palms. I struggled to my feet and ran down the alley. Without looking back, I dashed into Bessemer Street. Breathless and terrified, I reached the street. The afternoon shoppers looked at me with concern but kept their distance. I must have looked like a madman. Honestly, for a moment I felt like a madman who'd gone crazy. I pulled out my phone. Of course, it was dead. I checked my watch. It was still Wednesday. The afternoon of the same day I'd gone in. I'd only been there for an hour. I turned back to look at the alley. The alley was gone. Between the barbecue restaurant and the building next door was only a solid brick wall. No gaps, no yard, no door. On the wall, scrawled in chalk, or something that looked like chalk but could be something else, something between words and reality. Same time next week. 47B below was a smaller line. P. Hey, if you don't come, I have other options. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was £3,000 in cash, the full amount. There was also a handwritten note, the handwriting seemingly changing as I read. Service fee paid in full. The entertainment you provided was excellent. See you later. I went straight home. No stopping at the subway station. No stopping for a beer. No time to process what had just happened. I walked 3 miles back to my apartment, clutching the envelope full of cash tightly, like a talisman. Once home, I locked the door, checked every room to make sure it was real, knocked on the walls, and sat on the furniture to confirm it was all tangible, ordinary, mundane entities. Then sat at my desk, staring at my laptop for 3 hours without turning it on. I was thinking about quitting my job and going to medical school, but that thing would surely find me.